Hello, we are bored of it. I'm Farrell, this is Tally.
Hello.
And welcome to the 1960 presidential election. 1960, The Making of the President, is a two-player head-to-head recreation of the 1960 Nixon versus Kennedy presidential campaign. In this game, you will take the role of one of the candidates and campaign across the USA in an attempt to have the most electoral votes on election day. It plays with the Twilight Struggle kind of system, where in a round you'll each take turns playing one card. These cards are either bad for you or bad for your opponent. And generally the amount of tokens or cubes on the board will change somewhere. Plus, you'll be stressed all the time and there'll be a lot of arguments over New York.
Now, we've only played Twilight Struggle and Imperial Struggle by GMT Games, who are also the publisher of 1960. But The Making of the President, out of the three, is for sure the easiest to learn, the quickest, the most streamlined, and personally for us, has the best theme.
Hey everyone. So, quick message. We've been doing this for nearly a year now, and we are nearly at 2,000 subscribers. And our dream is to get 2,000 before the year is out. And, you know, if you've watched a few videos and you haven't subscribed, if you've found this video helpful, or if it's your first time and you like us, it would mean the world if you could subscribe and help us reach that goal. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much, and we hope the video helps you.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The game is set in the last 2 months of the campaign trail, and each round represents a week. You'll be campaigning, take part in the presidential debate, and have a nail-biting finale on Election Day. One player plays as Nixon and the other as Kennedy. You'll alternate playing cards, either for their event if it's your card or a neutral card, or just play them for campaign points, also known as CP. Campaign points allow you to add or remove cubes on a state, travel between regions of the USA, to speak on the issues, or to use the media to advertise how great you are, all of which have various benefits. Having your cubes on a state will mean that they will vote for you on election day. Being the leader in an issue will gain you momentum tokens and endorsements, and having media support in a region will allow you to ignore the fact that your opponent is carrying a state or is physically in a location, which generally makes your life more difficult if you're trying to flip a state.
Unlike Twilight Struggle, your opponent's events don't activate when you play that card. Instead, they must trigger it by spending a momentum token. Alternatively, when you play a card with their event that you don't want to happen, you can preempt it by playing 2 of your own momentum tokens, and then they will be unable to trigger it. Importantly, there can only be one colour of cube on a state, and that shows how that state will vote on election day. If there are 4 cubes, it is said that that candidate is carrying that state, and this means that to remove their cubes, you'll have to draw cubes from a shared bag, and only the ones of your own colour will count. This also applies if their token is there.
So, on election day, you take the seal of each state that has your coloured cubes on it, and any states that don't have any cubes vote their base colour, unless there's an endorsement in play in a region. Then they side with whoever's endorsement that is. The player with the most electoral votes wins. So, if you're looking to get into these heavier card-based head-to-head style games, this is a terrific place to start. Watergate, which is smaller, quicker and simpler, is a better gateway game, but if you prefer a more big box experience, this is what we'd suggest. The fact that a state can only be red or blue means that the status can be instantly seen with a quick glance, so the board state is easy to follow and quick to assess. Also, on your turn, you only have 4 options. Play a card for its event, play it for its CP on states, use its CP on the issues, or use the CP on the media. So that's not too hard to remember, and there are a lot less sub-rules than you'd expect.
Now, if you haven't played this type of game before, you should know there will be a lot of stress, but fun stress. You see, often you'll have a hand of cards that will have your opponent's events on them, and if they trigger them, it will be terrible for whatever strategy you've come up with, and you're going to spend your time trying to figure out how to avoid that. It's also a zero-sum game, in that whatever one person does is going to be bad for the other. Now, what this means is that 1960 will constantly present you with engaging and interesting puzzles. You know, you've got this hand of cards and you go, What order do I play them in to get the most out of them? Which should I use as defense? Which for CP? How do I counter what my opponent's done? You see, you'll always be thinking and you'll always be scheming. It's a very intense game, but this just means it's more exciting as you follow the highs and the lows of your campaign. One thing 1960 does really well is it scales back the stress and the worry that you have in other GMT games because every location on the board is absolutely crucial, or just because anything one player does is just horrific for the other player. As one example, here, if you have a card with an opponent's event on it and you play it, it doesn't trigger automatically. They have to spend a momentum token to trigger it. And often players won't have more than one or two at a time, if they have any at all. And this means that, crucially, you can be tactical. If you get a really bad hand full of your opponent's events, you can trick them. You can play the least worst one first, hoping they'll bite, spend all the momentum tokens, and then you can play the really horrific ones without any fear. You just don't get this big ball of stress in your stomach that you used to get when you played Twilight Struggle, for example, where you have a hand at the start of the round with 6 of your opponent's events. You don't have to be that miserable now because you know at most only 1 or maybe 2, if you're really unlucky, will be triggered.
Second to this, the states can change hands so quickly and the board state be altered so thoroughly by a single card that you don't really get too attached to any of the locations. In other games of this genre, losing control of a single space can have massive repercussions and you really feel that hit. In 1960, there's more of a swashbuckling vibe. Who's ahead at any one moment can swing wildly from round to round. And we've seen players be in positions that are seemingly untenable, bounce back and win, which is something that likely wouldn't happen in Twilight Struggle or Imperial Struggle. Now, this is a card-driven game, but the good news is you don't have to learn all the cards in order to get good, and you won't necessarily be whomped by a more experienced player, because the majority of cards that you play that belong to your opponent won't be triggered. It's almost completely random what will show up, so you can't really prepare as such.
Now, the cards themselves are all thoroughly interesting, as they all have a unique image and factoid. And the designers have really used the historical events that they represent in interesting ways. But that said, because 1960 is quite straightforward in a lot of ways, you will get samey feeling cards. You'll see a lot of stuff that's like add 7 state support anywhere, but no more than 1 per state, and just things of that nature.
You also have debate and election day event cards, which can give a candidate an edge during these events. These are a pretty cool shake-up to the regular cards and do provide interesting dilemmas. But, and this is a big but, it can be more than a little annoying that they are totally random when you get them. They can have huge impacts on critical moments of the game, so it can feel more than a little unfair if your opponent has all of theirs in play but you've never even seen any of yours.
And this carries over actually to some almost too powerful cards. You see, there's certain cards, as an example for this, being one that doesn't let your opponent campaign when you play it for the entire round. And it's obviously luck who draws this and when. But if it's drawn in the final round, when campaigning is utterly crucial to have any chance of winning, it can basically, just having it played against you, lose you the game straight up. And it's just not very fair. So you should know that there's a lot of luck in this game, likely more than you would want from a head-to-head strategic game. You see, a lot of things in this game will be decided by drawing cubes from this bag. And although it begins the game evenly seeded, when you draw cubes out, they don't go back in. How you get them back in is by resting, which each card you play has a rest value. You collect cubes of that number in the rest area, and then at the end of the round, you'll collect them all and they will go back in the bag. So, you know, while you can kind of control this, it's still chance. And you could have 98 of your cubes in this bag and 2 of your opponents, and still draw both of your opponents at the worst possible time. And the thing about rest is that it's on the cards, and the cards you get are totally random. So you could end up with a hand that gives you 0 rest for the entire round, or a hand that gives you 10 rest for the entire round.
Now, cards with high CP or better events often have less rest, so the argument is rest versus how powerful a turn can be should balance out, but we're not quite sure this equates in practice. In reality, you might have no control over how loaded the bag is when it comes to important drawing events like the debates and election day, or you might have total dominance over the bag but still lose the draw. Worse, you might spend a card in doing immediate action but pull your opponent's cubes out of the bag, meaning that you've wasted one of your finite actions.
You see, I've literally lost an incredibly hard-fought game of 1960 by a single cube. The bag was loaded, 80-20 in my favour. I had to draw 3 cubes on election day, and I needed 1 to swing California, and then I would have got loads of electoral votes and won the game. Obviously, I drew only my opponent's cubes, and he won by a single electoral vote. And I didn't actually mind because I had terrific fun playing. And you could even argue it's thematic in terms of how elections go. That said, it's something to bring up because I know there are people who will despise that a 2-hour game of strategy could end like that.
What we really like is how each system ties in with the others. You'll want to be campaigning on the issues because that will get you endorsements. But the player who owns the most media cubes gets to swap the position of 2 issues. So that will lead you into also wanting to place media cubes. Once you have media cubes, it makes it easier for you to campaign on states where your opponent is or if they're carrying that state. So you'll want to take advantage of that. It creates quite the puzzle and means that you can't really concede on any front.
One gameplay mechanism we thoroughly enjoy in 1960 are the endorsement tokens. These are tokens which, when placed in a region, if on election day states in that region have no cubes from either candidate, then rather than vote for the pre-printed flavour of government, they will vote for whoever controls the endorsement. And this just creates a terrific gameplay wrinkle because it allows much more strategy in the game. You see, it's wonderfully fun to litter the board with endorsement tokens because it means that rather than having to flip states, which is quite obviously harder, you can just remove your opponent's cubes and leave them bare. With a 4 CP card, because states of low value are often only left with 1 cube, you could get 4 states to your side. And even worse for your opponent, they're going to have to make a decision then of do they try and counteract what you've done, or do they go along with their original plan, which was probably for a more high value target. And because you only get these by positioning on the issues, it creates a really spirited debate in this area of the game.
Also, for us, one huge bonus of this game is the final scoring. We love games where there's no scoring tracker, so the reveal of who has won at the end of the game is a big event. Think Scythe or Brass. Here, the tension is kept up until you reveal your electoral votes, and it really encapsulates the drama of election day. In some games, you might know who's won if they've really dominated, but usually you don't, because this is not a majority area control game, it's a numbers game. That's what makes it so exciting, to take each state seal from all of the states that you've won, count up your votes whilst warily looking over at your opponent. So, final thoughts. If you love 2-player head-to-head style games and don't mind a more complex game, this is a surefire winner. It's also a great proposition if you've looked at games like Twilight Struggle longingly that feel like maybe it's too much for you.
1960, The Making of the President, is more accessible, more streamlined, and arguably more fun than some of those other games. And it's a total recommendation from us. The one thing we would say is that there's probably more randomness in this game than you would like in such a difficult strategy game.
If you enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate it. And so with the dogs, if you could give it a thumbs up. And please subscribe to our channel if you're not already for regular board game content, always with a little hint of doggo. And feel free to ask us in the comments anything about the game and let us know your favourite head-to-head tug-of-war style games.
Or GMT game.
Or GMT games. We'd love to hear your recommendations. Bye bye.
See ya.